Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name's Nader. This is going to be an exercise-based video for the for of loop video, just to get some more extra practice with how for of loops work in JavaScript. Let's get right into some of the exercises together. Okay, so just to quickly recap the syntax for this, this is kind of how the for of loop syntax works. We went through this in the previous video. We're going to have for, const, and then or let, depending on what we need to do with it, some variable that we can choose the name of, and then the actual thing that we're iterating over after the of keyword. Okay, and we can iterate over arrays, strings, maps, sets, and a couple other things that we went into in detail in the for of loops video as well. So let's start with the first warm-up exercise together. This one's relatively simple. It just gives our fingers warmed up for the next few exercises. I'd like you to create a variable called numbers that points to this array right here. All right. And then I want you to just use a for of loop to print out each number squared. So squared just means the number multiplied by itself. So for example, 10 multiplied by 10 would be 100. So we'd print out 100 for the first value, and we would do that for every value inside of this array. So use a for of loop to do this instead of a regular for loop. I'll give you a moment to try that out. You can pause the video and then we'll try it together. All right, let's go ahead and do this. Let's do const numbers. And this is going to equal to this array right here. And what we're going to do is for of loop over this. So we can say for const, and then we can do something here of numbers. Here we can have an arbitrary name for the variable we want to call each iteration of this loop. So since this is numbers plural, I'm just going to say number singular. So we're going to loop through each number one at a time inside of our numbers array. Then I want to console.log out that number, but I don't want to log it out by itself. I want to square it. So I'm just going to say to the power of 2. You can also say number times number would do the exact same thing. Once you've tried that, I'll just pull up my terminal and I'm going to run node and then the warm-up exercise, assuming I'm in the correct folder, and look at that. We actually get all these numbers squared printed out to the screen. Definitely a bit easier to reason about and even code and think about than the kind of index-based version of this. So I hope you found that kind of interesting. Let's go to the first exercise. All right, so for this one, I'd like you to create a variable called ages that points to this array of numbers right here. Then I want you to create an array called results. That's just an empty array to start, so just square brackets. Then I want you to use a for of loop to loop over ages. And for each item or each age inside of ages, I want you to add an object to this empty results array that starts off as empty with an age key, which is the value of the age that we're looking at. And also a name key that's always just going to be the string dragon. All right. So what does that look like? Well, that would look like this for the first two values. The first one would be age of 10, name of dragon. Second would be age of 42, name of dragon. And notice the curly brackets. That would be the object that is kind of encapsulating these. Okay. Then finally print out the results, and you should get something that looks like this array right here, which is an array of objects, each that has a property that is a name, as well as an age. Okay, so give that a shot, and then once you're done and tried that out, or if you get stuck, feel free to unpause the video and we'll go through it together. Okay, let's start with our first task. So const ages, this is going to be this array of numbers right there, perfect. Then we want to create an empty results array, so I'll just say const results. I'll just do this on the line below, just to save some space. Empty array. Now I want to use a for of loop to loop over the ages array. Okay, so we're going to say for const. I'm going to call each one an age of ages. We want to do something with each of these ages. We want to do kind of what, right? We want to do this. We want to kind of construct this object, which has an age key that points to the age, and then a name key that points to dragon all the time. So there's a few ways we can do this. Let's actually just create the object that we want to add. So I'll just say const dragon object. And this is going to be an object that looks like this. It's going to have an age that's going to point to the age value. Now this looks tricky. This here on the left hand side is basically this. It's the string age, which is the key for this value. age on the right hand side is the actual age that we're looping over. For example, 10 or 42 or 15. Okay, my editor is actually going to get rid of those quotes because it likes to save space and characters. However, we covered that in the object video, so if that looks a little bit wonky once I save it, definitely check that out for some extra tips there. Then we also want to add the name property. So I will ignore the quotes for this one. I'll just say name. And I mentioned that the name can just always be dragon here. So we're hatching a whole bunch of dragons, or I guess in this case, we're not really hatching them. We have a nice stable of dragons. Maybe this is something like Game of Thrones or something like that. All right. So once we have that dragon object, we're asked to add it to this results array, which is empty to start. So to add something onto the end of an array, we can use the push method on the array object. So we can say results.push, and we can push this dragon object onto the end of this results array. And remember, this is the object that we're creating, which is going to look like this right here. Except the only thing that's going to be changing each time is going to be the age is going to change, so that we'll end up with a bunch of different age dragons just like this. Okay, and finally we'll console.log out our results, and let's see if we have the correct answer. So we want to see this array being printed out with these 8 different dragons. Let's see what we get. So I'll run node exercise 1, and look at that. So the formatting is slightly different because of the space in my terminal, but effectively we do get those 8 dragons printed out, which is fantastic. So there are definitely a few ways to do this. This is just the for of loop version of that. You can also probably shorten the code by actually kind of taking this part here and just putting it directly into this push right here, so you don't have to create this object first. Whichever way is easier for you to understand is probably the best way to go about this. I'll just show you a little bit of extra fanciness in here because I can't help myself. It does slightly bother me that all of these are named dragon. I would like them to have at least a slightly differentiating name. If we had another array or object somewhere, maybe we could use that. But just to make it a little bit more interesting, I'm going to actually use a template string here just to show you how that would work. So I'll replace these with a backtick set of strings, and this allows us to do string templating, which puts a variable inside of the string for us very easily. So I can basically do this. I can say $, curly brackets, and I can put a variable in here. So I can put dragon, and maybe I want to name these dragon 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, for example. So I'll create a let dragon number start at 1, and then maybe each loop around I will increase the dragon number by 1 like that, and I can say this is going to be the dragon number. Okay, definitely you didn't need to do this. I'm just showing you how you could make this more interesting and actually add some complexity to this task. And if I run this, you'll see it gets a bit cut off there, but you'll see that we have dragons 1 through 8. All right, and this is called string templating right here. Perfect. Let's go to exercise 2. So for this one, we want to start working with sets. If you are not familiar with sets, definitely check out the sets video. We want to create an empty set to start that's called names, and we want to create another empty set called caps names. Okay, so 2 sets to start. We want to add these names to, I should say names, right here. And we want to add Bilbo, Hermione, Spock, and Leia. Okay. And these are all strings. We want to add them as names to the set names. Then what we want to do is we want to create a for of loop that loops over this names set and adds the capitalized version of each name to the caps names set. And then finally we want to print out caps names, right? So this would be all caps Bilbo, all caps Hermione, all caps Spock, and all capitalized Leia, with every single letter being capitalized. So let's try this out. Actually, I should give you a chance to try it yourself first. I bet you couldn't do this in a split millisecond, so try it out, pause the video, and then we'll go back to it together. Okay, so we'll create a const here, and we'll call this one names, and this will be a new set. Then we want to create another new set called caps names, where we're going to store the capitalized names. So we'll say cause caps names, and this is another new set. Okay. Slightly different syntax for these sets and maps than the arrays and objects. And then we want to add all of these names to the name set. So let's go ahead and do that. So we can do names dot, what is it? Add. I always forget which one it is. If you forgot, definitely look up the documentation on something like MDN. But I want to add Bilbo. I'm going to copy this a couple times. Then I want to add Hermione, Spock, and Leia. I hope some of these might stand up to some of you. Some great character names there for sure. Then we want to use a for of loop to loop over these names. And as we're doing it, we want to add each name's capitalized version to caps names, right? So we'll say for const name of names. So we're saying for every single name inside of names, right? So for each of these, we want to do something with that name. So we want to say caps names dot add that name dot to uppercase, just like that. Okay, and this is a method on strings that allows us to uppercase a string. If you found that in the documentation or the previous videos, that's kind of the places to look. If you just did a Google search for how to capitalize a string in JavaScript, you probably would find this pretty quickly as well. So once that's done, we want to console.log out our caps names. And hopefully what's going to happen is we're going to loop through this set of names, and for each one add capitalized Bilbo, capitalized Hermione, Spock, and Leia to caps names, which is a second set which starts off as empty as well, and we should have that set have everything inside of it all capitalized. So I'm going to do node, I'm going to do exercise 2, and look at that. We have our set with the capitalized versions of all the names inside of the first set, which is fantastic. This is just kind of an example of how you can start using sets to kind of store things. This would have the nice feature of ignoring duplicates. Many reasons why we can use this, and we'll get into these in the projects as we start learning more JavaScript together. Now, exercise 3. This one's going to be fun. We're going to work with maps for this one. So I'll give an explanation and you can try it. So we want to create a map called backpack. And it's going to have the following entries inside of it. So we're going to have the entry 1, which is going to point to a value of this object. So these are objects as values for each of the keys. Okay, so the keys are numbers and the values are objects with their own properties. So 1 is a name of sword and value 300, 2 is a name of banana, value 5, 3 is a name of gold nugget, value of 10,000, and 4 is a name of pants and value of 100. So I just want to point out a couple of things here. These keys are numbers, okay, and the values are objects. This is very common when we do a lot of web development, where we'll have things like the ID of an object being given to us by something that we're using, and maybe we can store it uniquely inside of a map using that ID, where we then store the actual value of that thing that we're interested in for that ID at that spot. Okay, and we would get rid of duplicates as well, because we can only have one unique ID per item. All right, so that's the map here called backpack. Then what we want to do is we want a for of loop over this backpack and print out the name and value for each item in the following format. So we want to do name, colon, and then $ value. So for example, for the sword right here, which is the first one, we want to print out sword, colon, and then $300. At the end of this for of loop, we also want to print out the total value of all of the items in the backpack. So give that a shot, and then once you're ready, come back to the video and let's go through it together. Okay, so let's construct this backpack to start. So we're going to create const backpack is equal to a new map this time. Similar to a set, but this has keys and values, unlike the set, which only has one. And we want to add each of these in turn. So I'm going to say backpack.set instead of add, and I'm going to put 1 as the key, and I'm going to add this value right here as the value. Okay, I'm going to do this a couple of times. So I'm going to have IDs 2, 3, and 4, and I'm just going to copy over these values really quick here. So that one, and then the gold nugget, And then wouldn't it be nice to have this in our backpack? Holy moly. And pants for some reason. Not sure why I guess pants are good to have a backup of at all times. Assuming you like pants, that is. So now we want a for of loop over this. So how do we do this? We saw that a for of loop allows us to loop over anything that's an iterable in JavaScript. So we saw it already with arrays, we saw it with the set, and now we can see it with the map. So we can do this. We can say for const for each item of the backpack map. Let's just take a look at what we get if we console log out each item. Just to kind of get a teaser for how we can actually work through this, because sometimes it's a bit hard to reason through. So if I run node and then I run exercise 3, okay, cool. So it looks like we get back an array, right, for each item, where the first thing in the array is the ID, and then the second thing in the array here is the actual object that we're interested in. So it turns out that we're not actually really interested in this ID, right? There are ways that we can change or mess around with this to actually only get the values. However, I just want to show you how you would do this without having to do that. Very similar to how object.keys and object.values work, except maps allow you to get that in an easier way as well. But if we didn't have that, we could actually do something like this. We could say like const key is equal to item at 0, and const value is equal to item at 1, right? And technically this would be the ID, and then this would be the item itself. I already have item defined, so I can't redefine it again, but that's how it would actually turn out if we were to try to get these out, right? So if I wanted to print out the ID and then the item itself, just like that instead, just so we can see how that looks differently, you can see now we're pulling those out individually. We're pulling out the ID separately, which we don't actually need, and then we have the item itself, which is this object right here, which is the second thing, or index 1 inside of item. Okay, so since we don't need the ID, I'll actually get rid of that line. Then I'll get rid of this console log for now, because what we're actually wanting to do is console log out the name and then $value. So I'm going to use a template string for this. And to do that, very similar to the previous exercise, we use these backticks. So first thing is the name, and that's going to be dynamic because the name is going to be sword, then banana, then gold nugget, then pants. Then there's a colon, then there's a space, then there's a $, and then there's another $, and then this thing. So this looks ultra confusing, right? Because I want the actual $, printed here, but in JavaScript template strings, we need to use $signs to actually show, $, and then curly brackets to actually show the thing being printed out. So let's see what happens with this. And if this is actually going to work as expected. So I want the $sign of the $sign brackets, because $sign brackets is how we actually print something out, but I do want this $sign actually printed out. So let's see what happens. So if I grab the item itself, .name, and then the item itself, .value, let's see if this actually ends up working. All right. So there we go. So we do have it working. So we have sword, colon, 300, banana, colon, $5, gold nugget, $10,000, pants, $100. Cool. So that's how we would kind of get this funny syntax of having a $sign actually printed out into the string. And then the curly brackets would kind of work the same way. It's only when you have $sign, curly brackets right after each other that you have to be careful, because that's how you put variables inside of a template string. So we're almost done here. The last thing we need to do is we need to print out the total value of all of the items inside the backpack. Okay. So this is going to be tricky because we need to actually keep track of a running total as we're looping over. So this is not something that we can figure out as we're looping over one at a time. We need to have looped through every single item to find this. So that's a hint that we probably need another variable somewhere to keep track of this sum or total value of these items. So to do that, I'm going to create a variable up here. I'm going to say let total value. I'm going to start it at 0. Now notice that I used let, and that's because I know that I'm going to be adding to this number or changing this number as we're looping over the items in the backpack. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to add to total value plus equals the item itself dot value. And remember, item itself dot value are each of these values inside of this object, the 10,000, 100, 5, and 300. Okay, so once that's done, I can do a console.log of, I'll just say total, and then I can put in a template string here. So you can do a template string, or you can do a regular string with a kind of commas in it. If you do multiple console logs, I'll just do it this way, just so you can see it a bit more clearly. And this would be the total value. Okay, and I'll actually put a $sign here, just so that it's extra clear that this is kind of monetary things that we're talking about. So if I run this, fingers crossed, let's see what we get. And look at that, right? I'm pretty sure that that's the correct answer. Even just kind of doing the math, just looking at this, I'm pretty sure that's right. So we have a total value of 10,405 inside of our backpack, which is actually not bad. Probably more than the average backpack for most people. Definitely more than my backpack. So hopefully you can kind of see how this works, right? This was mainly to show how it works with things like arrays and sets and maps. However, we can also use it with things like strings. There are ways we can use this with objects if we use the entries or values or keys. And then later on in future videos, we'll see how it works with kind of some of the other fancier types that we can see in JavaScript together. But much more kind of ergonomic use of this looping through stuff. And as you get more practice with JavaScript, you can even shorten this syntax even further using some of the new notations inside newer versions of the language, which we will also get to together as we need them in future videos. So I hope that that was a valuable video for you. If it was useful, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to see the solutions that you came up with inside the comments below. It's always the case that you'll come up with different solutions or kind of versions of this with slight kind of differentiating factors. By no means is the way that I wrote any of this code the one or the best way to do it. I'd love to see someone come up with a better way than this and share it with all of us in the comments. I'm always learning from other people's code, and that's the best way to learn, is by being open and looking at how the best way to optimize your code or make it more readable or understandable for others, or learn some of these new syntaxes together. So that said, the next video that we're going to do together is actually a series of project videos to kind of take all the things that we've been learning so far and wrap them up into a nice big project, so that we can see how we can kind of think about a project, plan a project, and then actually execute and finish and complete that project given the tasks that we've learned so far. Following those projects, then we can eventually go to some newer things in JavaScript, like promises and asynchronous things, and even working with the DOM and HTML. So countless different topics that we can go together, but I'm excited to see you in the projects video, which will come up next. I'll see you there.